They called me poor in the middle of a mahogany dining room that I owned. Not rented, not shared. Owned, down to the deed in a filing cabinet that bore my signature. My name is Varel Dane, and for most of my life, my extended family thought I was a failure. At the Dane family's monthly strategy dinners, everyone came armed with business bragging rights. Blair would flaunt her luxury brand campaigns like they were royal decrees. Jackson? He once made a toast about a helicopter ride he took just to skip traffic. I showed up in worn jeans, driving a 10-year-old sedan, with barely a whisper about my work, and so they assumed the worst. "You're still in that little apartment, right?" Blair had asked last month with a smirk, her gold bangles clinking like punctuation marks. "You should really consider something more adult." I smiled, nodded, and reached for the pitcher of water. They didn't know that the little apartment she referred to sat at the center of a 5-property portfolio I owned under a name they'd never connect to me: Cobalt Ridge Partners. Tonight would be different. Tonight, they'd finally find out what I'd been building in silence, and what happens when the family disgrace turns out to hold the keys to everything they thought was theirs. The Dane estate hadn't changed in 20 years. It was still the same sprawling monument to generational wealth. White stone arches, groomed hedges clipped with obsessive precision, and a valet station that ran like a 5-star hotel. Even the doormat still read, "Excellence is in our blood." I pulled up in my dusty Subaru, parked 2 streets over, and walked in through the side path. I didn't need the valet, or their questions, not tonight. Inside, the foyer gleamed, polished marble, abstract oil paintings that meant nothing, staff in crisp black uniforms. No one greeted me by name, but I knew the layout by muscle memory. I could still feel the sting from every childhood dinner, where I'd been seated at the far end, like a distant cousin someone had to invite out of guilt. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and a chandelier so oversized it looked like it could crush you if you said the wrong thing. I took my usual seat, not quite at the children's table, but certainly not among the power players. My cousin Jackson was already in full form, swirling his Cabernet like it was a prop. "Just flew in from Aspen," he said, speaking loud enough for the entire table. "Closed on a chalet next to a guy who owns half of Silicon Valley. The floors heat themselves, and the driveway melts snow." "Sounds charming," Aunt Celeste said, not looking up from her wine. "We just hosted the governor for brunch. He brought his own chef." Not to be outdone, Blair joined in. "I had lunch with someone from Vogue Interiors last week," she purred. "They want to feature my new flagship in Soho. It's all reclaimed marble and custom cashmere walls. Only by invitation, of course." Laughter rippled around the table. I took a quiet sip of water. Still sparkling. Still overpriced. Still meant to remind you that you didn't belong. Uncle Malcolm was tapping at his phone. He never said much, just nodded approvingly at the loudest voices. And then, of course, came the pivot. Aunt Celeste turned toward me with that perfectly still smile. "And Varel, dear, how's Portland?" There it was. I set my fork down. "Peaceful," I said. Blair leaned in, eyes already gleaming. "You're still in that little duplex, right? On Maple or, wait, Marion Street?" "Marion," I answered slowly. "Oh, right, Marion," she laughed. "Isn't that where they're planning to do rezoning? Something about the whole block being bought out?" I gave a neutral shrug. "I've heard rumors." Truth. That building was one of my earliest acquisitions, the very first multi-unit property under Cobalt Ridge Partners. I'd overseen the renovations myself, fought tooth and nail to preserve the 1940s stonework, and negotiated protections so longtime residents wouldn't be pushed out. To them, it was a forgotten corner of town. To me, it was sacred ground. "Still renting, then?" Jackson added with a smirk. "Didn't know people still did that after 30. "I like the space," I replied simply. Celeste tilted her head. "But you're 36 now, aren't you, dear?" 36, I confirmed. She gave a faux sympathetic sigh. "It's time to own something real, build a future." The table nodded in smug consensus. "I'm managing," I said, fighting the curl of a smile. They kept going, like I hadn't even spoken. Blair was on her second glass of wine, and her third monologue about boutique fragrance markets. Jackson discussed commercial properties in Miami he hadn't even visited. Celeste spoke of legacy wealth like it was her invention. They assumed I was just there to listen. What they didn't know, what none of them could even begin to imagine, was that the very room they were sitting in, the estate they held so dear, was soon to be entangled in the biggest reckoning of their lives. Because tonight's dinner had a hidden agenda. The family board had been informed of a pending audit on Dane Tower, our family's flagship property, and no one knew who the new majority stakeholder was. They thought it might be foreign money or a venture group. They were wrong. It was me. And soon, every single person at that table would understand what I'd really been doing all these years, while they laughed at my thrift store cardigans and recycled handbags. I was building, quietly, thoroughly, and I was about to flip their entire world upside down. 10 years ago, I signed the Articles of Incorporation for Cobalt Ridge Partners on the back of a coffee receipt. I was 26, underemployed, and living off commission scraps from showing low-rent apartments, while Blair was jetting off to fashion weeks and Jackson was burning investor money on biotech passion projects. I was cold-calling landlords and negotiating lease renewals for elderly tenants terrified of rent hikes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I learned fast about depreciation, zoning loopholes, quiet title actions. I saw how entire neighborhoods were gutted by developers who treated people like obstacles, and I decided I wouldn't build that way. If I was going to be in this business, I would do it on my terms. Cobalt Ridge started small, a fourplex in southeast Portland, then an 8-unit complex. I partnered with contractors who believed in fair pay. I kept rent stable. I restored buildings instead of erasing them. And while my family dismissed my low-level hustle, I was assembling something they couldn't fathom. A reputation. By the time I hit 30, I had enough equity to start moving differently. I created subsidiaries, trusts, shells within shells. Not to hide wealth, but to shield intention. I didn't want to be chased for partnerships or headlines. I wanted control. And then Dane Tower came up for sale. It was a family monument, an aging high-rise downtown built by my great-grandfather, once a beacon of pride. But over the years, it had become a cesspool of mismanagement and corruption. Leases were inflated. Maintenance budgets were cooked. Tenants complained to deaf ears. The current board, stacked with family members, wanted to sell it quietly to a buyer who wouldn't ask too many questions. I asked every question. Through a firm based in Denver, backed by a capital pool with no direct ties to me, Cobalt Ridge acquired a 78% controlling interest in Dane Tower. Not a single person in my family knew, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I spent the next 6 months combing through the building's books. What I found made me nauseous. My cousin Jackson had diverted repair funds to cover closing costs on his Colorado property. Blair's branding firm had billed the building for resident engagement events that never happened. And Aunt Celeste? She was routing money through a cleaning service she technically owned. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. But I didn't report them. Not yet. Instead, I put together a transition plan, one that would bring in independent management, restore financial transparency, and preserve the building as affordable housing for longtime tenants. The announcement would be public, the audit results damning, but I wanted them to hear it first, face to face. That's why I agreed to attend the family dinner. They thought I was just the quiet cousin from Portland. They didn't know I held the deed to their legacy. And tomorrow morning, they'd all find out. The morning air was sharp, almost surgical, as I stepped into the glass elevator that carried me to the penthouse office floor of Cobalt Ridge. My reflection stared back. Black slacks, navy wool blazer, polished shoes. A far cry from the soft cotton cardigans my family associated me with. I arrived before the others. My assistant, Lyra, met me outside the boardroom. Audit packets are printed. Forensics report is in the binder. Media statement is embargoed until 10 a.m. She hesitated. They're already here, sitting in the side conference lounge like it's their war room. Let them wait, I said, stepping inside. 10 minutes later, the door opened. I didn't have to look to know who entered. The distinct perfume trails and leather loafers gave them away. Uncle Malcolm led the group, visibly tense. Blair followed close behind. her smile so tight it could snap. Jackson looked like he hadn't slept. "Excuse me," he barked. "This meeting is private." I turned slowly, met his eyes. "It is," I said. "And I invited you." Malcolm blinked. "Varel?" I nodded. "Welcome. Please, have a seat." Silence thickened as they took in the view. The walls, the logo etched on the glass. "This is your office?" Celeste whispered. "It is. And you work for, what is it, Cobalt Ridge?" "I am Cobalt Ridge." You could have heard a fork drop. "You?" Blair laughed once, hollow and shrill. "You own Dane Tower?" "I do," I said simply, "along with the audit reports, the debt register, the contractor history, and the new operating charter you'll be signing, or declining, today." "No," Jackson muttered. "This is a joke. You show people apartments. You rent." "I renovate, I preserve, I build," I said, my voice even. "And I've been watching this family bleed a building dry in the name of tradition. It ends now." I opened the binder, sliding the first report across the table. Page 12 outlines unauthorized withdrawals totaling $2.3 million, I said, glancing at Jackson. "Your Jackson Valley retreat? Paid with roof repair funds?" He went ghost pale. Page 21 details a marketing budget that doesn't align with any actual events. "Blair, your branding firm billed for 3 months of tenant programming, none of which occurred." She tried to speak, but only mouthed the word no. "And Celeste," I added, gently flipping to the next section. "The cleaning company routing invoices through an unregistered entity? A shell owned by your husband. Classic." Celeste dropped her wine glass. "You'd expose your own family?" she asked, eyes wide. "No," I said. "You exposed yourselves. I'm just holding up the mirror." Malcolm hadn't said a word. Now he shifted in his chair, his voice low. "We can fix this. We can clean it quietly." "Too late," I replied. "At 10 a.m., the press release goes live. The public will know that Cobalt Ridge is implementing operational reform across Dane Tower. That includes independent oversight, full transparency, and yes, legal review of past transactions." Jackson stood up, furious. "You want to ruin us?" "I want to reset us," I said. Blair's phone buzzed. She read the screen, color draining from her face. "It's out," she whispered. "Cobalt Ridge confirms new CEO, Varel Dane, acquires $1.9 billion in urban real estate, ranked top 3 for ethical development." The others stared at me as if I'd become unrecognizable. "You really lived in that apartment?" Blair asked, stunned. "I still do," I answered. "It keeps me grounded, unlike the illusion you all cling to." A long, suffocating pause. Then Malcolm asked, "What do you want from us?" "I want you to remember what the Dane name was built on," I said quietly. "It meant protection, community, legacy. You made it a punchline." I stood and gathered the binders. "So here's the choice. Sign the charter and work with me. Or pack your things. There's a nice set of starter condos available in the suburbs. I'll even waive the application fee." As I left the room, I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The silence behind me was the sound of power changing hands. The press release went live at exactly 10 a.m. By 10:07, my phone had 17 missed calls, 5 text messages, and 2 voicemails, one from Uncle Malcolm and one from Blair, that started tearful and ended with something that sounded like rage wrapped in disbelief. I didn't listen to either. Instead, I watched the news ticker scroll across the muted flat screen on my office wall. Cobalt Ridge. CEO revealed Varel Dane quietly acquires majority control of Dane Tower in historic turnaround deal. They called me invisible. Turns out, invisibility is just the first step toward being underestimated, and then becoming undeniable. Within 24 hours, the walls began to crack. Celeste announced her resignation from 3 local foundation boards. The official reason was mental health and family focus. The real reason? Whispers about misuse of public grants and nepotistic vendor contracts were growing louder by the hour. Blair's luxury branding agency lost 3 major accounts by the end of the week. Her firm was blacklisted from an entire corporate real estate trust after leaked documents showed she'd double-invoiced a tenant wellness event that never took place. Her husband filed for separation the following Monday. The public explanation was irreconcilable schedules. Jackson retreated completely. No public statements, no defensive tweets. Even his Aspen retreat went quiet. According to one source, he attempted to sell it back to the developer for a loss. But not everything was destruction. I had always believed that the right kind of consequence doesn't just punish, it reshapes. 3 days after the announcement, Uncle Malcolm called again. This time, I answered. "I didn't know," he said, his voice hoarse. "None of us did." "You never asked," I replied. "You were too busy being impressed by noise." He paused, then said something unexpected. "I want to learn, not to take it back, just to understand it." And for the first time, I heard sincerity in his voice, not pride, not fear, just humility. So I invited him to Cobalt Ridge's operations center the following week. No press, no board, just me, a whiteboard, and a stack of portfolios. I walked him through everything: how I financed small acquisitions through staggered debt instruments, how I built rent stabilization into development projections, how I measured impact by community longevity, not just net yield. He listened like a student, took notes, asked real questions. It was a start. Celeste never called. But a week later, I received a handwritten note on heavy ivory stationery with no signature. 2 words. "You were right." That was all. And Blair, she surprised me the most. 6 months later, I attended a local event for a transitional housing nonprofit my company funded. I was scanning the crowd when I saw her, dressed plainly, hair tied back, no camera crew. She was helping a little girl tie her shoes and organizing a donation bin for winter coats. She didn't see me. That was fine. Maybe redemption doesn't always begin with an apology. Maybe it begins with action. I still lived in my apartment on Marion Street. People still assumed I rented. I let them. It was easier that way. Being underestimated had always worked in my favor. Besides, I liked the quiet. The courtyard bloomed every spring, full of hanging pots and chalk art from the neighborhood kids. The scent of fresh herbs from Mrs. Calderon's balcony drifted through the air in the evenings. No gated community could buy this kind of warmth. This place was home. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Success had never been about marble countertops or helicopter weekends. It was about agency, integrity, building something no one could strip from me. 2 weeks after the audit, a letter arrived from one of the tenants at Dane Tower. For the first time in 15 years, I feel safe here. Not just in the building, but in being heard. Thank you. I pinned it to my wall. It reminded me why I'd started this in the first place, why I'd endured years of being called modest, average, even irrelevant, why I'd never corrected them when they called me poor. Because I wasn't building for optics. I was building for permanence, for fairness, for legacy. 6 months later, the Dane family winter gathering didn't happen at the old estate. It happened in the courtyard of Dane Tower. No marble halls, no catered extravagance. Just folding chairs, glowing lanterns, and the sound of children laughing beside gingerbread tables. What used to be a cold monument to status now buzzed with life. My family showed up differently. Blair wore sneakers and served hot cocoa with real warmth. Jackson helped an elderly tenant hang lights, no cameras in sight. Uncle Malcolm spoke with residents, not over them. Even Aunt Celeste stopped by, quiet, observant, no makeup, no performance. My mother sat beside Mrs. Lynn, a tenant of 30 years, listening with a softness I hadn't seen in decades. She found me near the fountain. "This is what you built," she said quietly. "I just cleared the space," I replied. "They did the rest." "But why?" she asked. "Why real estate?" I thought about it, about the early years, neglected properties, scared tenants, sleepless nights reading zoning laws. Because when you build something that shelters people, I said, you build something that lasts. She nodded. And now I understand that legacy isn't something you inherit, I said. It's something you create, choice by choice. Later, I stood on my fire escape, watching Dane Tower glow, no longer a symbol of arrogance, but of restoration, of community. My phone buzzed with offers, interviews, partnerships, praise. I let them wait. Success to me wasn't about noise. It was about foundation. If you've ever been told you were too quiet, too plain, too small, remember this. You don't have to shout to matter. You just have to build something real. And sometimes, the best kind of revenge is becoming exactly who they thought you could never be. I didn't wait for their answer. I returned to the suite upstairs, once reserved for Claudine, now prepared for its new occupant. The skyline stretched wide beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Pacific glowing with that golden edge you only see in late afternoon. Rowan was already there, a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. "Think they'll take the deal?" he asked. "They already have," I said, glancing at my phone. The notifications rolled in like waves. Grayson's resignation, formalized. Claudine's early retirement, announced. The board's vote, passed. Barely, but passed. By sunset, it was official. The empire that once laughed at my ambition now reported to me. I poured a glass and walked to the desk, my desk now. I reached into my bag and pulled out an old printout. Worn edges, faded ink, but the words still clear. It was the rejection email, the one Claudine had sent me 6 years earlier. "Leona, while we respect your enthusiasm, your leadership instincts are not aligned with the expectations at Merit Group. We believe a support role may be more appropriate at this stage in your development." I smiled. Then I folded it once and slid it into the drawer, next to a new letter. My appointment as executive chair of the board. The calls started soon after. My mother, my father, 2 cousins, then Grayson himself. Messages laced with panic, guilt, excuses. "How could you do this to your aunt? You didn't have to humiliate them. We're family, Leona. Family!" Where was that word when I stood in that boardroom with shaking hands and unacknowledged ideas? Where was it when I walked out to laughter? I didn't answer any of them. I only typed one message in the family group chat. "Don't worry about the family name. Merit Group is finally in qualified hands." Then I turned off my phone and watched the city. Not for revenge, not for power, for peace. A peace I had earned not through aggression, not through screaming or proving myself to people who never listened, but by building something so undeniable they were forced to take notice. I didn't need them to believe in me anymore. I became the kind of woman they had to believe in, because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming the one they now answer to. Claudine had been right about one thing, though. Back then, I wasn't qualified to work at Merit Group. I was qualified to own it,